Welcome, Ephraim Schwartz over here in the incredible city of Caesarea today. First of all, I want to thank all you Mishpacha readers for reading and watching this video, because it's an excuse to get me out of the house, which is certainly an important thing during these times when, unfortunately, there's no tourists, but I have you guys, and that's fantastic. Chazal tell us there are two cities. We have Yerushalayim and we have Caesarea. Right? When Yerushalayim is built up, Caesarea will be in ruins. If Caesarea is built up, Yerushalayim will be in ruins. Baruch Hashem, we have a Yerushalayim today. And today we have the ruins of the city of Caesarea. However, during our coronavirus, most of the museums and everything are pretty much closed in Yerushalayim. However, Caesarea is open. So we're here in Caesarea, and we're going to learn about an incredible site and the alternate history of Klal Yisrael during many, many periods. In a brief nutshell, we're going to focus on a few of those periods. So I just wanted to get the order of them. We're going to talk today a little bit about the history of Caesarea, what was important, such an important city. We're going to talk about Hurdas. We're going to see some incredible things. We're talking about the Tzaddikim and the Tanaim and the Maraim that lived here in this very city. So come with me. We're going to stop off at our first stop as we come into this national park. Let's take a look at the theater. We saw one in Sipori. We didn't get a good feel. This is a theater that we're going to be able to stand in and talk a little bit about what took place over here and Chazal's perspective on theaters in Eretz Yisrael. Welcome. We have arrived here inside of the theater of Caesarea. An incredible theater, one of the few theaters that are not only remaining in Eretz Yisrael of the many that were built, but certainly one that is still in use today. Perhaps many of you have never heard of Caesarea before this. Most of my tourists say that makes Caesarea famous. Yaakov Shweki, Caesarea. Well, this is where that is, right here. Yaakov Shweki, Caesarea, right here in the ancient Roman theater. The incredible irony of this is that the theater was built by the Romans in order to fortify their empire, to keep their barbarian Roman troops under control. You have to entertain people. You have to keep them distracted so that they don't think of rebelling, starting up against you. It's like Jews on an airplane, as we once said. 12 hours from America to Eretz Yisrael. The only way that you keep people sane, you give them entertainment. Same thing in prisons in America. You keep them, give them cable TV, they're quiet. Same thing over here. We have to provide entertainment. And we have two different forms of entertainment. The earlier form of entertainment, at least under the period of Herod the Great, who we're going to talk about, built this place, is to have plays. All types of plays, male actors, comedies, tragedies, stories. Originally they were built in order to educate the people, to try to give them that Greek culture, which the Romans took over, but took it to a much more violent level. But ultimately it just became a place of nivel peh, a place where the Rabbanim, one after the other, said, this is no place where a nice Jewish boy should be hanging out. Chazal repeatedly tell us this, and of course, this is someplace, if Chazal are telling us this, it means that there are Jews that are coming over here. In fact, we have a story of Rabbi Abba, one of the great Amoraim that lived here in Caesarea. And we were told about the story about somebody that worked over here in one of the theaters. And they come to him and tell him, listen, this guy is working inside of our theaters. What are you going to do about it? He said, Nebuch, this guy needs money. You know, you got to do what you got to do for your job to make a living. So again, that's Rabbi Bo's perspective, but we see that there are certainly Jews that were involved that used to come to these things. Think about that. This is a place where Rabbanim told us this is the Romans, this is the peak of Nivel, a place where we're not allowed to be. And today we have Yaakov Shweki getting up right over here in this theater and saying, V'hi sheyam dalav v'yisev avenu. V'hi sheyam I'm not Shweki. Right? Where are they? They're not here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here protecting us. Thousands of people coming here to this theater to see Yaakov Shweki. Here here is a picture, a dugma of what the theater would look like. We have the seats on the outside over here, right? This would fit up thousands of people in the theater. And then there was a wall. So we are open up to the sea today, but there used to be a wall where the actors were, and underneath they would have the changing rooms outside. This area was called the orchestra. All types of idols, all type of statues, which we're going to see still remain over here. So this is the structure of a classic theater, which is a half circle. So we have walked a few meters from the theater. We've crossed through a small little gate because the theater was to a large degree walled off in later periods in time. And this was added on. The city of Caesarea grew further down this way. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the man that built this city. His name was Herod, who humbly called himself Herod the Great. The only way that I would say that he was great is that he was able to build things that last forever. It's because of him that we have so many sites in Eretz Yisrael. But who was Herod? Where did he come from? The Yevanim, and after that, how the Jews slowly become back again towards the Greek, taking on Hellenism. One of the last Hashmonai kings was a man named Yochanan Horkanus. And Yochanan Horkanus comes in Eretz and he starts expanding the borders, building armies, strong, in the Greek manner. And as he's growing and the borders are growing further and further down to the south, he comes to a epiphany, a realization. He realizes that Jews are great accountants, we're great doctors, lawyers, but not necessarily the best fighting soldiers. And we need to have some good Goyim, shall we call them, to fight for us. Our Goyim that will do the work and protect and defend our country. Who are they? Right, so he conquers a nation that lived in the south of Israel called the Idumeans. He conquers them, and in the only time in Jewish history, he gives them a choice. It's almost like a crusade. Either you convert to Judaism, or we kill you all. This is the way Josephus describes it. Chazal, of course, frowned upon this. This is not the way that we get converts, but they needed to be Jewish because we needed them to go ahead and be people that would go ahead and defend us. The leader of them was a man named Antipatris. Antipatris says, you know what? No problem. We will all convert, we'll join the army, we'll defend your people on one condition. When we're coming in here, we're not coming in as second-class citizens. We want to come in there as regular citizens. The way that we're going to ensure that is my little bicycle is going to marry your daughter. And then we'll know that we're accepted. Who's his bicycle? His bicycle is a little boy named Herod. He wasn't the great back then. And Herod marries the daughter of Yochanan Horkanus, whose name was Miriam. So Herod is this person that lives with this dilemma his entire life. Am I somebody, do they accept me as Jewish or don't they accept me as Jewish? And he's going to prove that he's more Jewish than the Jews. He goes to Rome, he studies Roman history, he's going to be more Jewish than the Jews, and at the same time he's going to be more Roman than the Romans. And he goes ahead and he builds all over the place. At the same time, he's extremely paranoid. Nobody's going to accept me. And he kills everybody that he knows. He kills his generals, he kills his brother, he kills wives, he kills out Chazal, anybody that the Rabbanim that are living at that time. The famous story, he goes over to Bava ben Buta and he disguises himself and he says, what do the rabbis think about me? And Bava ben Buta says, he's the Melech Yisrael. We don't go ahead and speak bad about him. Right? And he goes, well, if that's the case, then I feel bad that I killed all the rabbis. Oops. What can I do as a tshuva? And he said, you poked out the eyes of the Jewish people, you can restore the eyes and build the Beis HaMikdash. And Herod builds the entire complex of the Har HaBayis, the Beis HaMikdash that we all have in our mind, the one that nobody that saw a building like this has ever seen a beautiful building in the world. That's the building of the psychopath Herod. It's hard to go ahead and wrap our brains out. He builds Masada, and as he builds Yerushalayim for the Jews, he's going to go ahead and build the city of Caesarea for the Romans. This is a very unlikely city to build for Herod because this is going to be a central port, and we're going to take a look at the port later on. We'll talk about how he built this, but one of the major problems is this is a straight shorelines. Usually you need to have an inland, but Herod comes here and he says, look at this. This place is magnificent. I mean, it's just beautiful. This is where I want to live. This is where I'm going to build my palace. And he constructs one of the most incredible palaces. Josephus Christ says the nicest palace of Herod is built right over here. We have a gorgeous garden that is behind me over here that was built. Behind that, going into the water, we're going to see that there was a big room over there. Again, not much is left of it because it's been destroyed by the waves because it doesn't really work to build something in the water. A huge swimming pool, and if you can note over there, there's a little pillar. See that standing in front of the swimming pool? You can even see some of the mosaics that are still over there on the floor of the swimming pool. And you can imagine the people that were bathing and enjoying themselves over there. And In that swimming pool, in fact, Herod drowns his 2 children, who he suspects are going to attack him and betray him. When his wife Miriam hears that this is what happens, right, she commits suicide. She jumps off the roof, and Chazal tell us that anybody that says that they are from the Malchus Chashmai, they're really Avodim, because they're coming from Herod, who isn't necessarily Jewish. Herod, by the way, being the madman that he was, has his wife congealed in honey. And he would bring her out to all of the state functions with him over there, because this was his beloved wife. So if anybody's husband ever calls them honey out there, be careful, right? But that's where it comes from. I don't know. But if you look all the way out where the waves are breaking over there, that was his palace. He was far away. It's almost set up like in other places, in Masad and other places where we see Herod, where he had his own separate area. So this was the palace of Herod the Great. This was the construction that he had. We just have the remains of it today. There's a picture over there as well that we can see of what it once looked like. They used to have a virtual reality here where you could actually experience what it was alive back in the good old tourism days, and it was an amazing sight to go ahead and to see the flowers, the people coming and going. This was the center of the administrative center of the end of the Jewish period, the Roman period, and all the way for hundreds of years until destroyed by the Arabs. This was the central seat of political life, the Washington, D.C., shall we call it, of Eretz Yisrael. Behind us over here, we can see this beautiful amphitheater behind me on the left, and we're going to talk about what took place over there and the periods of time over there as well. So we have come over here, we walked from the palace, and now we're inside of the amphitheater. As opposed to the theater that we saw beforehand, the amphitheater is an entire circle. It goes all the way down there till the end, and it was expanded. And this was a huge theater that could seat about 25,000 people. So it was much higher raised, and it would be all around here. And they would be all coming here to see the show, the great events that would take place over here. Now, as opposed to the theater, which was plays, comedies, tragedies, as we spoke about, the Romans felt, after moving from the Greek period, they needed to up the ante. When I was a kid growing up, we had Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy. Today's kids, it's violence, it's gore, it's blood, it's guts, and that's what they came here to see. If you may have heard of the gladiators, this is where the gladiators are fought. There'll be wild animals brought from all over the world, exotic animals, lions and tigers and bears. And Chazal talk about this. And they would bring out their prisoners and their slaves that would get killed and devoured by these, to the cheers of the bloodthirsty mobs as they would scream and yell watching the great shows. Worse than the blood of the animals was, of course, the highlight was the gladiators. In Chazal, we talk about the Ludim. Right, the Gemara mentions a few times Ludim. Gladiators were men that were trained and raised to be professional fighters. And they would fight against animals, and they would be pitted one against the other. Obviously, this is not necessarily a Jewish thing to do. It was a terrible, terrible thing. However, we do have some of the great rabbis that were actually part of this. In fact, one of the greatest Balei Tshuva of all time, we're told, is somebody named Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish was a Ludi. Resh Lakish was somebody that was raised in as to be a gladiator. And he fought, as it's hard to imagine. This is the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan, right, the great Resh Lakish. And he fought, and the Gemara tells us a story that he sold himself. It seems he did it for money. And he did it, and he was trained, and he grew. And it says, came the day that he's supposed to fight, and he got up and he said, I need my last meal. This was customary to be given. And they gave him his meal, and while they were all sitting and eating, he took a bag of rocks and went over and boom, killed all of his guards and escaped, right? So we have Resh Lakish, that's how he starts life. Again, it's hard to imagine this. The Gemara talks about Resh Lakish being a listim, but ultimately, Resh Lakish meets Rabbi Yochanan, he's swimming, and Rabbi Yochanan goes ahead and is mekar of him, and he even offers him his sister as his wife if he'll become a Ben Torah, if he'll learn. And it says his strength left him. So we have the great Resh Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan's fighting over here. But then we have some greater tragedies over here. We talk about the Asara Haruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs that were killed. We talk about it on Tisha B'Av. We talk about it on Yom Kippur, the Asara Haruge Malchus. And these Asara Haruge Malchus to a large degree, were certainly killed over here at different points in time. Rabbi Akiva, the famous story of Rabbi Akiva having his skin ripped off him by the Romans while he said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That takes place right over here. This is where the Talmidim are coming, Zu Torah v'zu Sechaira. This is the reward for learning Torah. Right over here. Reb Hanania ben Trajan, who was wrapped up in Sifrei Torah and set on fire as the Oisiyes, our Parchos. Right over here. This is where the greatest tragedies in Klal Yisrael take place over here. It's hard to imagine that we're standing here with when I come over here, I feel like I'm going to Auschwitz. I'm going to places where Jews were murdered in the Babi Yar, places where Jews were killed in the worst places. This is it. This is where the Romans killed. But they did it not like the Germans. They did it to the mobs and the cheering and screaming crowds. And there are Jews at the same time while this is happening, living here inside of the city of Caesarea. Now, obviously, we talked about Chazal saying, don't go to theaters. Theaters are a terrible place. Nobody should go to theaters. It's bad influences. It's chukei sagoyim. However, there's an interesting, an Amari that talks about coming to the amphitheaters, and where he discusses that perhaps this is an appropriate place for Jews. Not only is it an appropriate place, but one could even possibly be Machal Shabbos to come right over here to a gladiator, to see Jews ripped up, to see barbarians, to see all of that. How is that possible? Right, so Rabbi Nosson says two svaras. He says the first svara is the reason why they would come here is to save Jews. What does that mean, to save Jews? How do you save Jews? Well, right over here on this side, if you notice, just one place there was a little porch over there. That's where the governor would sit. The head of the city, the Roman governor, would sit right over here, and the crowds would be surrounding him on all sides. And you'd have the two gladiators fighting with one another, or they'd have the prisoner getting ready to be killed. And then he's standing there, and now the soldier, the gladiator that's about to kill the other person, does not do that without the permission of the governor. And he turns to the governor, and he says, should I kill him or should I not kill him? And the governor puts his hands out like this. If they cheer yes, then he would be saved. If he cheers down, then he would be killed. And based on the reaction of the mobs and the crowd, this is what would happen. So Rabbi Nosson says Jews should come over here and they should cheer and they should scream in order to go ahead and save perhaps one of their brothers and sisters. Another reason why he suggests perhaps you should come over here, even on Shabbos possibly, is because we can be mater the agunos that would come out of it. A Jewish woman who loses her husband and there are no kosher witnesses that see him being killed, she's not allowed to remarry again. So they would come here and they would testify that they have seen her husband pass away and they could be mater him. That's why the Jews would come over here. But one can think when they come to this beautiful city of Caesarea, but this is what took place over here. So when I come over here, I usually try to get my chevra together that's with me to sing with me a little bit. So we've left the Hippodrome. It was an amphitheater when we saw it. In later periods in time, as the Roman Empire became Christian and more religious, obviously the gladiators and the blood sport went out, and it was turned into something, they still need entertainment, it was turned into actually a horse racing area. Not as violent, but certainly keeps the crowds busy. We leave that area and we move into this area. This area is the more Crusader area. That's why there was a wall that was built there, because once the Crusaders came here in later periods, in the Muslim period, they shut off that part of the park. And we come to this area, which is the original port that was here, that was built by Herod the Great. Why here? As we mentioned, by his palace, this seems to be the worst place possible to make a port, and history has proven that because it's disappeared. To make a port, perhaps the most important thing that you need is to have an inland so that the breakwater doesn't destroy the port. Here it's a straight coastline, up and down on both sides. Why build a port over here? Well, first of all, Herod loves the view. That's always important. Second of all, right across from here, as we go into the valley, we come into a valley called Wadi Ara. Today it's Highway 65, and that takes us all the way up through the north. So it's a good highway which goes from there. You can take it down to Syria, to Lebanon, and all of the countries over there. The function of the port was when the Romans would come here, they could go to the entire Roman Empire. From here, this was a highway that could also take you down to Egypt, as the many attackers' armies that came in here would do. The second reason is, as we noted beforehand, there was some wells, some water cisterns over here. There's a fresh water table that's underneath this area, so they could get fresh water easier. Certainly not enough from the city, and maybe we'll see later on how they brought fresh water here as well. Now, Herod wasn't the first person to build over here. In fact, this was a tower and a port that was built over here underneath this, called the Straton Tower, built by the Hellenists, by the Greeks that were here earlier than that in the times of Alexander. Straton was an idol, actually the husband of one of that we're famous with, Asherah. So certainly there's a place of idolatry, and Herod, however, comes here and he says, we're going to make something magnificent. This is going to be the major port, the major Roman city, just like the Beis Hamikdash was for us. We're going to build something for the Roman. It's going to have everything. Now, his architects come over here and they take a look around and they go, how are you going to build a port over here? He says, figure it out. Well, how are we going to figure it out? So what they did is a fascinating process that they've uncovered over here is they would build it by many, many stages. Number one, they laid down rocks. Number two, they built these wooden frames which they could slowly sink down and position. They filled them up with cement, with ashes that would still give them room, and then slowly they built the walls that would go all the way from the other end, all the way out there. You see where that sailboat is far out there in the distance? Around there is where the entrance was, and thousands of boats. In fact, I even see a big ship over there in the backyard, in the background over there, and you have to imagine hundreds of ships coming from Rome here into the port of Eretz Yisrael. This was the gateway. This became the gateway to Eretz Yisrael, this port over here. Port didn't last much long. Within a century, the breakwaters came, they destroyed the entire port, and we have the remains, the rubble that we see all around here today. What's fascinating, though, is, this is a fun thing to do with your tourists sometimes, is they actually have a scuba diving company over here. And you can go down there and they do scuba diving underwater archaeology, where they found gold coins dating back from the different periods here in Eretz Yisrael. They find vessels, all types of fascinating things, all right over here. In fact, there's a group that went out scuba diving right now. So this is a great place to come to appreciate the entranceway, the gateway to Eretz Yisrael, and also to appreciate, we can't get to Eretz Yisrael, the skies are closed, but the boats are still open. Back then they didn't have any skies. This was the route, this is the boats, this is how they came and they entered Eretz Yisrael. We're going to take a look as we leave the whole huge city. They would get off the boat here. There would be a big temple over here where they would have idols and welcome. There's stores, there's shops, everything that you could need. This was the glorious city. Like when we come into the old city of Yerushalayim, this was the entrance, the Ben Gurion airport, so to speak, to Eretz Yisrael. So let's go ahead and finish up our tour as we get to the entrance to the city, which today is the Crusader Gate, and we'll talk about the final period of Caesarea. We are sitting over here at the end of our tour of the city. We spoke about Hurdus, we spoke about the Tanoim, we talked about the Asara Harugei Malchus. This was a city where tremendous Gedolim lived. It's a city called where the Rabbane Caesari, the Gemara refers to them, the great rabbis of Caesarea. We have Rabbi Oshia. Rabbi Abbo was certainly the most significant of the rabbis that were living here at that time. He had his children go learn in Tiberia, which was certainly the Era Torah. In fact, there are some people that say that even the parts of the Talmud Yerushalmi was written over here in the city of Caesarea as well. The Torah was flourishing through the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries until the Muslim period. You might have noticed as we were walking, we saw this big mosque over here, and the Muslims come to Eretz Yisrael and they wipe out the Romans, they wipe out the Christians that were here at this period of time, and they destroy the city, destroy the Jews and the Christians. They slowly rebuild parts of it, and that period lasts for about 400 years until the year 1099, when we have the Crusader Empire that comes to Eretz Yisrael. The Crusaders were coming from Europe, and they came with one mission: to liberate the holy Christian sites from the Muslims that were living over here. They come to Eretz Yisrael, they come to Yerushalayim, they conquer Yerushalayim in the year 1099. They wipe out all the Jews, the Muslims, they establish the Crusader Empire over here. In 1187, it turns around. The Muslims come back, Salah ad-Din, and they wipe out the Crusaders. And then the Crusaders come back again. And ultimately, we have this war where the country was divided. We have the coastline belongs to the Crusaders, whereas the center of the country will belong to the Arab kingdom. Akko becomes the Crusader capital. Caesarea becomes a major city as well. And this gate, this area, was built by a king named Louis IX. St. Louis, you've heard of? St. Louis. The concept is an oxymoron. I want to read you, you've heard about fake news a lot. Listen to Wikipedia's version about who this Louis IX was. They describe this king, right? His actions were inspired by Christian zeal and Catholic devotion. He was a just king, although he exacted what was due to him. He had no wish to wrong anyone, from the lowest peasant to the richest vassal. Renowned for his moderate lifestyle, reason, bravery, and chivalrous politeness. He was a splendid knight whose kindness and engaging manner made him popular. He was therefore regarded as the ideal Christian ruler. Even he was occasionally rebuked by contemporaries as a monk king. Sounds great. Saint Louis. Then listen to the next sentence. However, he decided to severely punish blasphemy, for which he set the punishment mutilation of the tongue and the lips. Right? This is a man that murdered people. Do you know who the blasphemers were? Our great-grandparents, our ancestors. Right? We all know the famous story of the disputation of Rabbi Yechiel Paris and Nicolas Donin in France, where the Rabbonim of France, which was the ear of the Rishonim in the 13th century, have to flee after they win the debate, and they come to Eretz Yisrael. We all know, we sit on Tisha B'Av and we talk about Shali Srufa Ba'esh, the Sifrei Torah, and the 24 wagon loads of the handwritten Talmuds that were burnt. That was St. Louis. That was this Crusader Russia that comes to Eretz Yisrael to fight against, to move down to Egypt. He comes in 1250 and 1248 in what's called the 8th Crusade, and he loses that crusade. He gets captured in Egypt, and he comes back to Eretz Yisrael, and he sits here for 4 or 5 years, and he fortifies this city of Caesarea, builds it up again. He goes back to France, and then he comes back again in the year 1270 once again to try his last crusade, or the last crusade to a large degree, in coming to Eretz Yisrael and trying to conquer Eretz Yisrael and throw out the Muslims and throw out the Christians. After that period of time, the Crusaders ultimately get destroyed by the Mamelukes, the Berbers that come down, the slaves from Egypt that destroy and wipe out most of the Crusader kingdom, and Eretz Yisrael and the city of Caesarea to a large degree stays empty. It remains this way until the late 1800s, when Baron Rothschild comes to Eretz Yisrael and he hears about the famous city of Caesarea and its history for Klal Yisrael. At that point in time, Yerushalayim is ruins. Maybe we can rebuild Caesarea. And he funds, the city starts with a new aliyah, a new wave of Jews returning to Eretz Yisrael. He starts the different farms and different settlements in Eretz Yisrael. Not far from here, we have Zichron Yaakov, and he brings Jews there. And at the same time, he comes over here and he starts funding part of the archaeological digs over here and bringing the economy build up. Today, we have Caesarea. Today, we have Yerushalayim. Today, we have the Torah once again flourishing. We're sitting here and we're studying the Torah of Rabbi Abbo, the Tanoim, the Amoraim, the Yerushalmi, and Yerushalayim is once again standing. Mirza Hashem, very soon we should go ahead and see the Geula Shlema, where the Caesarea, the city where Yaakov Shweki is now singing V'hisha Amda. Hashem should go ahead, be Omed Aleinu, L'chamed on all of our goyim, L'chal Eisenu v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be Matzilenu Miyadim and bring us the Geula Shlema. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon again in our next tour with Rabbi Schwartz.